Hello, everyone. Welcome to Next Level Humanity podcast. I have Jamie Ricks here. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so Jamie is a VC and he is helping founders to build. And our theme today is conviction under pressure. So I'll start by asking you some questions. Your work today is about backing up driven founders, and your VC's
hmm
name is Driven VC. But before
hmm
venture capital, you had some experiences I would like to dive deeper into. What experiences shaped your own sense of drive and ambition? And when did you decide to, back founders?
Yeah, I think my drive and ambition probably started just, as a kid. I grew up in rural North Carolina, so I'm originally from the US, even though I'm based in Chile, Latin America today. But my dad was a farmer, my mom was a nurse, and both of them had work ethic, incredible work ethic, and I just really saw what they did, and I wanted more. I wanted to. After I finished undergrad, I moved to California and then eventually moved to Chile. And I've always had this ambition to go out and do more, but always through a way of supporting. Yeah, I think it was kind of as a common thing that my dad was a farmer slash business owner.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this entrepreneurial drive from him, but my mom was a nurse and she had this compassion, empathy. And so one way or another, this combination created me who I am today, this job as being a business owner, wanting to back founders, but also the compassion, empathy, because the founders go through, they go through the roller coaster every day. And, you got to kind of be compassionate, empathy for what they're going through. And so I think it was just a combination of my parents and my childhood that drove me to be who I am today.
Yeah, we had similar experiences. I grew up with two parents who were, working the whole time, very hardworking. So I think when you see founders or businessmen or women doing their thing, hardworking and trying to get to somewhere, I think you become very inspired on becoming a founder yourself and also backing up founders.
hmm
And looking back, what moments in your early career taught you most about risk, responsibility, and decision making?
Um, going back to my parents divorced when I was younger. And so then we were highly with my mom majority of the time. And I think just, I had to become very responsible very early, being a single parent, having a single parent. So at a very early age, I had to make a lot of decisions on my own. And so I think that shaped a lot how became very independent. I left home when I was, like a lot of American kids, I was 18, I go to college and never go back home after that. And then I become, I moved from at 22 from North Carolina to California, and then eventually, make it to Chile. So just that experience from my parents and me having become very independent, responsible early, kind of drove me to make these leaps and bounds, I think.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And what kind of personal values did you have long even before you became a general partner, which led you into being a
Yeah,
VC?
I think, growing up in like a very rural area, I think your word means a lot. And I think integrity is a big thing. I think when I think about the day, when I talk to founders, before we sign the term sheet, before we make an investment, if I agree to them verbally, we're going to do it. And I think I've been in the investment side since I first started my career in 99. And I've always kind of been on the financial side. So a lot of people have trusted me with their capital over the years. And I think it's based on that integrity of, what I say I'm going to do, I'm going to do, at least for, my best intentions. And so that's something I've always kind of grew up with, being from a rural area with, a handshake and a word means a lot. And I just
Mm,
kind of taken that through my career.
yeah, that's very important. I actually had a podcast recording here in London with
hmm
another fund manager, and she's not a VC, but she's managing funds on the startup stock market, and she's a very
Mm.
well known and well trusted fund manager. And we spoke about the same thing. When it comes to finances, the finance world is very small somehow because I mean, whenever things go wrong, the word spreads very fast. It's like,
Yeah.
the finance world is like that. So I think especially in the finance world, when you are managing other people's money, integrity, handshakes, being a man of your word does matter, and it's very, very highly important. And I think that's kind of like in the core of their being. Individuals who have that, I think, become successful fund managers.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And why Chile?
White chili. I mean, it's a double thing. Is one love. My wife's Chilena. I had studied, did my second year of my MBA in Chile, an exchange program back in 2005. And and what I was in a program was very mixed of there's a couple Europeans, a couple Americans, but it was mainly Latinos. There's like 40 of us. And at the time I saw that there's a lot of talent here, and I interned for a VC fund at the time in Chile in 2005. But I didn't think there was very sophisticated capital for the market. So I came from California, kind of when the tech it was after.com, and we seen what was going on. The tech boom was going back again in California, therefore US. And I just knew that this eventually going to happen to Latin America. And there's all this talent there, but there wasn't sophisticated capital. So I thought I could be that bridge of bringing sophistication from the Bay Area or California to Latin America and supporting these founders. And I thought it just could make a lot of impact at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of potential. I think in other places around the world besides US, UK, and Europe, or the bigger, you know, countries. And I think when you find that, it might be very rewarding. And you're investing in early stage, and early stage
Hmm.
usually requires clarity without certainty, and
Yeah.
that's tough. So how do you build conviction when information is incomplete?
We have a fund that's very specific in the sense we do back early stage founders in Latin America. We focus on the spaces of commerce enablers, and financial or fintech, financial technology. So what we have clarity on is today, for example, Latin America, the Penzos County is 12 to 15% of things are purchased online. Just call it digital commerce. We know that number in China is like 38%. And we didn't know the number in the US is somewhere in the middle. So we know we have clarity on that. We have clarity on this big trend that we're not going to go back to analog. We're just going to keep going into this digital transformation. And then on the financial side, for example, like credit availability, access, we know countries like Mexico and Colombia are well under capitalized in that space, and compared to like US or even Chile, where I'm at today. So we see these big trends that we know they're going in a certain direction, and then we try to find the right founders um, in these trends. And so we find conviction in the founders as well, but we first had this overall viewpoint that we know we're experts in these spaces, and then we try to find the right founder in these
Mm,
industries.
yeah. Yeah, so you have your own, and I know you have your own thesis, which is great. I mean, helping also undervalued founders, I think is a great mission. When you speak with founders, and when you go into their data rooms and go over the data, and also when you meet them, what signals tell you a founder has the resilience to endure the long road? And
Yeah.
also can execute and can grow and has a great strategy, not just the charisma to pitch, because pitching is something, but building a company and having the ability to execute, and also being able to differentiate in the market, creating great products,
Hmm.
differentiate both. Like there are a lot of pillars of startup success. So what early signals are you looking for?
I think is my probably the most important skill is just to listen.
Hmm.
Asking a lot of questions, trying to listen to see have they been resilient? as a child, as an adult. And it's delicate too, though, because I've backed a founder who's been very resilient, but I don't know that founders actually change over time as well. You know what I mean? You got to see, okay, this time will be different than the prior time. But I think it's really trying to dig deep in the individual, see how resilient they're going to be, how ambitious are they going to be. Because one thing we do in our fund in particular, we're in a small market, Chile, and we might back a founder in Chile or Peru or Colombia or Argentina, but we always know that that founder eventually has to move to either Mexico, Brazil, or the US. Those are markets. They can eventually go to other markets, but those are three markets that we focus on helping them scale into. So we start talking to founders about this day one to see if they're willing to do this, because operating in smaller markets just will not meet the markets for what a venture capital needs to do in returns. If the founder is not willing to do these types of things, then we'll back off. We won't pursue it. It's not easy. A lot of people have kids, have schools. There's lots of reasons why not to move. I've immigrated, and I understand how immigration works, but we require that of the founders in these smaller markets. So these types of questions and understanding what they've done through childhood, through their early careers, and then seeing if they're willing to do these types of things. You don't have all the information, as you said earlier. You don't get all the answers you're looking for, but
Yeah.
you can kind of find a trend in these things and see how ambitious these individuals are.
Yeah. And how do you balance the I think you also decide intuitively when it comes to investment. There's an intuitive
Mm-hmm.
side as well. You kind of, as you meet with more and more founders, as you see more projects, or generally as an investor, you build kind of like your own know-how, and
Mm-hmm.
intuitively you sometimes know. So how do you balance intuition, data, uh, when it
Yeah.
comes to decisions?
I think I generally my first call I know.
Hmm.
It's also instincts. I've been in the industry for 17 years though, so it's not like this just all happened one day to the next. They say your gut feeling, and I think that gut's been built over time.
Yeah.
However, that being said, though, it's not just me. I have a partner, Macarena. I have investment committee. We meet with the founder before we make the final decision.
Mhm.
And also what happens to me too is like, trying to get past, because you do get these incredible founders who could sell. They could sell ice to Eskimos, as they say, ice to Eskimos. And what I kind of figure out is that, if I'm really excited after first meeting, am I as excited after a second meeting and third meeting?
Mm.
Do I keep going up? Do I stay low, or do I go down? If I go down, then we probably pass. But if I
Yeah.
keep going up, then then these guys are on to something. And so that's how I kind of balance it out. It's just not me. There's a team. I'm not
Mm.
but I usually do I usually make that decision in the first meeting. And it's just interesting. They just, there's certain about certain people, their energy level that pulls you across through the Zoom. They pull you into what they're doing. You're thinking about it all night.
And
When I
driven.
go to bed,
Yeah, they're so
exactly.
driven.
That's where the drive comes from. They get you thinking about what they're doing. The next day, you're still thinking about it. If I'm not thinking about that founder the next day, then obviously I'm not that motivated about it. But if they
Yeah,
keep you thinking about it for the next 24 to 48 hours, then they're definitely doing something right.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. And I think the name driven VC comes from that, because driven VC is all about being driven, is all about that innovation, inner fire,
Yeah,
inspiration, and they're like focused on something, and they can't live without succeeding. It's like they either
yeah,
succeed or they die. Energy. That's the fire. And what gap has driven
yeah.
VC, gap in the
Also,
ecosystem? Yeah,
yeah. No, I was just gonna say about the driven the name.
yeah,
We had paid a group to help us find the name, a marketing agency, and for a few weeks they came up with a bunch of names, and we didn't like any of them. And then I have a book here on my desk called "Driven from Within" about Michael Jordan. So being from North Carolina, I'm a big basketball fan. I grew up playing basketball. It's kind of like religion in North Carolina to play basketball. And Jordan has this when he
yeah.
plays sports. He has a passion, he had the motivation, he had the work ethic. He was very charismatic. He had all these intangibles to be a
Inspired
dominant
from
basketball
within.
player.
Inspired from within. It's like,
And,
yeah,
and that's what we look for in a founder. That's what we look for in ourselves. That's what we look for in the founders. Do they meet these criteria? Can they live up to this? Can they do these things? And so that's where, we look at driven in two folds. We look at the founder, and then we kind of look as a mission driven, because if there is a impact with the founder, we believe a lot that there's certain types of impact that are 100% correlated with financial returns. We don't really look the back founders, if they're trying to help the 1% in Latin America who are already billionaires, it's not really interesting to us. But if they're helping, which is majority of the founders are doing this already, helping the lower middle class in Latin America and trying to help bring up the lower classes to this middle class and this big impact, we believe there's a 100% correlation between this type of impact in Latin America with financial returns. And so the word means twice to us. One is that, that passion, mission, individual, but then there's a mission driven here beside it. If you get both of them together, then obviously that's kind of a big green light for us.
Yeah. And what gap in the ecosystem are you aiming to address through through your fund?
Mm. Well, when I moved to Chile in 2013, 14, I felt that the founders kind of lacked ambition, to be honest. I felt, I was also coming from the Bay Area, at the time, so it was kind of hard to compare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in that time, the Bay Area, 2013, 14, that's when really the Bay Area was the center of the world for startups. I think that's kind of, the playing field's been evened out now for different reasons, but it has been. And so then I came to Chile, and I was supporting Latino founders, and they were all just, okay, I'm going to go from, I'm going to try to do something in Chile, and then I'll try to be the best in Chile. And then okay, now I'm going to try to be the best in Chile, Peru, and maybe Colombia. And really what Driven is trying to say, hey guys, no, let's don't do this small. Let's do this big. Let's help you. You're better than this. Let's go to Brazil. Let's go to the US. Let's go to Mexico. Let's go compete on the highest level. And so my value add to the founders is I'm able to bridge the gap from obviously more sophisticated capital in the US for people who are interested in Latin America. We have a team that has this, my partner, Macarena, she has operating experience working for Mercado Libre, Mercado Pago. It's the largest fintech in Latin America. So she brings this experience of operation experience in Latin America. I bring this experience of investing from the US and also investing in Latin America, and we complement each other very well. And then we have these partners. I have a partner in San Francisco. I got a partner in Brazil to help these guys. So we really try to help be this cross-border fund to help these guys scale into bigger markets, being focused in this thesis of commerce and fintech. So that's the gap that we really want to open the doors for the founders, and they can go out and accomplish these things.
Yeah, exactly. What actually I have been trying to do with the Turkish founders, telling them that you can do it and go global, and because it's possible.
It's possible.
In the right environment, I think with the right connections, it is possible. And what kind of founder journeys matter to you most? Even if they are not the loudest, not the fast growing, what's the story you're most interested in?
I got a couple of them. I have one already in my mind, and you mentioned another. I had another one came to my mind. And I'll talk about one company that we recently invested into. I've known the founders I've invested in them in my prior fund, but I worked for a prior group, and then in my current fund in Driven, it's a company called WordClouds. And why I mention WordClouds, obviously part of my portfolio, so you obviously always want to talk about your portfolio. But what WordClouds does is they're very low key. When you talk to the founders, they're very low key, but they just, 7 days a week, they just constantly do what they're supposed to do. Constantly do what they're supposed to do. And what I love about the guys as well is they've been fearless. They start out, they cold called the CEO of Uber, which is not typical for a lot of these are both Chilean founders. We back all of that to them, but these are two Chilean founders. So a lot of Chilean founders are, I would say, a little timid. Maybe language, maybe different reasons, but they're a little timid. But these guys, no, they cold called. They had a call with the CEO of Uber. He got Uber on the map for these guys. Now they work with Uber. And then what a lot of Spanish-speaking founders do in Latin America is they try to go from, okay, Chile, Peru, Colombia to Mexico. They try to do this. This is kind of the easiest path, I would say, for most Latino founders. Sometimes they go to US if they have a niche product, but mainly they go in this little triangle. But they got one big client and they went to Brazil. And for most people outside of Latin America, that probably makes sense. But when you're in Latin America, Brazil is like its own continent. There's Latin America, Spanish speaking Latin America, and there's Brazil. And Brazil's very, I would say, inward facing. And I could say sometimes the US used to be inward facing, but Brazil's very inward facing that Brazilians were Brazilians. They have enough technology, enough funds, they work within the country. And I've known a lot of founders who went and did pilots in Brazil and they came back. They put their toe in there and then they pull back out. And Word Clouds has not done that. They have fully charged ahead. One of the founders, which is part of what we look for, one of the founders moved to Brazil. He's effectively living in Airbnb, moving around the country, opening up new distribution centers. And so I just love their fearlessness. And they also have an incredible impact. So what they do is they use homes for storage, a product. And so if you can imagine like an Airbnb, but instead of somebody sleeping in that room, you have product there. And so like right now they work for the largest beer company in the world, AB InBev. And so you try to imagine if you've ever been to Sao Paulo, it's like one of these, it's like, 10 times New York City. And distribution is a big challenge. So that large truck that wants to deliver beer comes in that before and drops off beers at 10 homes and at midnight. And then the next day they do these mini deliveries, a couple cases of beer here, a couple of cases of beer here, keeps dropping to the mom and pops. And usually the person who's storing that product in the home is a stay-at-home mom. Usually because of kids, and we found out that's a really good dynamic. So they pay that family, it's called $300 to $400 a month to store this product, which is a very good income in Brazil. They do the same thing in Chile. So it has this incredible impact that's underlined that they have these women, they're mainly storing the product. You're not building a new infrastructure. And for every 4 homes they open up, they eliminate a truck from the fleet of AB InBev. So this is one example, a long story because I love to talk about the founders because they are the stars. We're just here to support them. And that's Word Clouds. That's one of our portfolio companies.
Lovely. Yeah, I get what you mean by fearlessness. No shame, no regret, just you go.
You got to do it.
Yeah, they do it. I love it. Yeah, and it needs a strong character, and it needs a high level of dedication and inspiration from within, like you said. Over the years, as a VC, as an investor, what belief about success, growth, and venture capital have you personally outgrown?
Personally outgrown. Success VC outgrown.
What have you learned new about venture capital and companies and what success looks like?
There's this, valuations it's a real challenge for founders. I don't know if I should say that this way, but I've seen a number of times where founders go through YC, for example. Back the number of founders who've gone through YC. And I think YC does a great service on the growth part. But the challenge is that a lot of founders, they go from one day to being valued at, maybe they're valued at, just say a simple number, $10 million. And then 6 months later, they're worth 4 to 5 times that going through YC.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because maybe they do well the demo day and they're able to raise capital. And they get this boom, but I would say 1 or 2% are able to continue that boom, especially if their investors are mainly going to be in Latin America. Because what happens is then the founder goes through this whole mental process that, okay, they're worth $50 million. This whole thing that, okay, now we're worth $50 million. And then when they come back to the market in a year from now, even if they've been growing and doing well, they come back, they raise capital in the local market. It's really tough for them. So I don't know that I've seen one in the last few years who's had, the ability to go and keep growing at that stage and keep growing that valuation that meets that metric. So I think that's a challenge. And on the other hand, I see founders, I've dealt with a founder before who I thought I thought he was undervaluing his company. And he said, Jamie, no, we want to raise it this valuation. I said, okay. I thought the market was higher for him because I'm always trying to give the founder what I think the market deserves. I'm not
Sure.
trying to overvalue them or undervalue them. I just try to do what I think is right for the market. And because again, I'm about integrity and reputation. That's my number one thing because I want to build a reputation with the founders thinking that Driven does the best thing for the founders that we think is right for the market. So anyway, this founder I thought was undervaluing himself. He said, no, Jamie, I did that. And he had been a serial founder and he was really smart because when the exit opportunity came for him, he had more flexibility in his exits because he was able to sell his company effectively, just call it 3x, fairly fast within a year and a half of our investment because he had stayed at a lower valuation and they gave him more flexibility. So I see both sides. Now you see the founder who tries to create a higher valuation or through YC or through however, trying to get the highest valuation, they give themselves less flexibility. And at the time that looks good for a VC because it gives them a higher MOIC. If you get a founder, you invest in 10, they go up to 50, you got a 5x multiple on paper, everybody should be happy. But is that company really worth that $50 million versus the company who says you thought they were worth 10, but they took valuation at 7, and then they flipped and got an exit in a year and a half effectively for 3x that because the founder had more leverage, more flexibility in the selling company because he didn't go for that 10 or 15, and it would have been a harder time for him to get purchased. So
Yeah.
I guess there's a couple of lessons learned.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And how do you define real value beyond exits, multiples, and headlines?
Um, you know, uh, I think you got to have the founder has to be growing the revenue. I mean, there has to be growth,
Sure.
and there's got to be growth, and there's have to be because the majority of companies I believe in Latin America that you back has this aspect of impact as well. So I think it's a combination of that, growth in revenue, impact. And there's a founder I backed here in the prior fund I worked with. Why I see true value. This is a founder who came from probably the worst neighborhood in Santiago. And Santiago is a city, it's a Chile's, I want to say, on the cusp of a developed country, developing to developed country. Um, but there's still a big diversity, a big gap between the haves and have-nots, if you will, the people who have wealth and the people who do not have wealth. And this individual, this founder, he came from one of the worst neighborhoods, the worst neighborhood for violence, poverty in Santiago. And I found this founder, I met him, and then we were closing out the prior fund I worked for. We were closing the fund, and then I tried to call him because I wanted to invest in this company, and he didn't answer my call. I called him 4 or 5 times, 6 times, and I was wondering, what's going on with, why is he not answering my, and then I said, hey, I want to invest in your company. I'm like, hey, I got aggressive. I said, hey, we want to invest in your company. And I finally had a chance to speak with him, and I realized that he had bad experience with 2 other VCs that effectively trying to take advantage of him, at least in his perspective. And I said, we're not that way. And so we started working together. Now this founder has a company that sells into probably at least 30 countries now. Hundreds of employees, of engineers in Chile and you could imagine this person who comes from this very modest background. So that's probably why he had this friction with these VCs because he wasn't used to having these conversations.
Yeah.
And anyway, so
That
short.
hunger is
Hmm?
like it's just great. It's such a big opportunity. Also, it's a value to support a guy like that, and also his hunger. I think when you're coming from that background, it's like
Yeah,
it's sometimes unstoppable.
Estapo, exactly. He moved from right in the pandemic. He moved from Santiago to Mexico City. No fear. He had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
You talk about these when you ask these questions, trying to find the drive, and you start listening to his childhood and stuff. You know that this guy, he doesn't have any fear, and
Yeah.
so he's did that. And actually now he's an investor of mine in my new fund. So it's a complete circle, and that's kind of like one of my big goals is that right now we have half of my LPs are founders, and if I can back these founders and help them, and they become our LPs, and we create this virtuous circle, that's I won't say the
Beautiful.
perfect world, but it's beautiful for me at least.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. And let's come down to some personal questions
Hmm.
as moving towards the end of our podcast. What truth keeps you grounded when especially responsibility feels heavy and outcomes remain uncertain, or when, things don't go the way you'd like them to go?
Um, the truth, I always tell my team and my partner as we were talking about this when we feel like something's kind of going wrong. I say, you know what? We're not surgeons. Nobody's going to die if we make a
Yeah.
mistake today. You know what I mean? So nobody's going to die. So I always think about that. It's like we're not surgeons. Thankful for them, but we do things I think are important. We hopefully make a big impact on a lot of different people. But in the day, nobody's going to die if we make it a right or wrong decision.
Yeah, great. I think great strategy. It lifts the heavy weight out of our, from our
Hmm.
shoulders. I love it. I'm gonna use that strategy myself. And finally, my
Hmm.
final question for today: if you could leave one message for founders in the earliest, most fragile stages of building, what would that be?
Um, just go for it. Just go for it. You know what I mean? When they're early, just go for it, and be ambitious and just take the risk. I think sometimes our biggest obstacle is ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think it's a challenge, especially in I don't know. Sometimes you come from Turkey, maybe you see this, and you kind of mentioned earlier. I think in these smaller markets, be it from the U.S., I feel different. I think in the U.S. they kind of grow up teaching a message, hey, you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
The world is at your hands, the world is at your fingertips, kind of message.
yeah,
And I don't see that message as strong in at least in Latin America and these emerging markets.
yeah,
And so I think, but they have the same abilities as we do in the U.S. I mean, we all have these same opportunities, not all the same, but a lot of the things I think that hold us back is our own self. And so that's why I try to push the founders to think bigger and just go for it.
yeah, yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah. Lovely. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining my podcast. I enjoyed it, learned a lot, and you're doing an amazing job. It's a huge responsibility, but supporting, the founders in Chile, I think that's just beautiful. Thanks to everyone who's listening to us, watching us on YouTube. I'll see you in the next episode, and make sure you become a member to our channel, subscribe to our channel, and also subscribe to our Spotify account. Thanks a lot, Jamie. Is there one last thing you'd like to add?
no, just thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on your platform. Hopefully, more people will start looking at these emerging markets.
Yeah,
I think there's just huge opportunities in emerging markets. I think people in the more developed, the bigger markets can add a lot of value to in bridging.
yeah,
And I mean, I think I'm just a big advocate, globalization personally, that I think there's a lot of things along learn across borders. And so just, if anybody ever wants to talk more about Latin America, feel free to reach out to me on
yeah.
LinkedIn or however they
Driven
want to reach
VC.
out.
Yeah,
Hmm?
lovely. Thank you. Driven VC,
Thank
uh,
you.
Amy Riggs. Thanks. Bye for
Take
now, and
care.
see you in the next episode.